God told me there are other afterlife options other than just heaven and hell. And he showed me there was a fifth option. I have a gift to see into the spiritual world, and since I was 12 years old, God's been showing me heaven. I'm also a Christian, and I have challenged my own belief many times, and I am convinced Jesus is the way. But there are more afterlife options other than heaven and hell, and here is how I learned about option number 5. I got to visit heaven one day. It was Thanksgiving morning, and I had woken up earlier than the rest of my family, and I just sat and I decided I was just going to spend some time with God. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I had this sense of peace that is crucial anytime I get an answer to one of my really big questions about God, because I know that these answers have the power to potentially change my faith entirely, change my identity. I got invited to come visit heaven, and when I first arrived, often God will sort of plop me into different places in heaven. I looked around and I saw this beautiful grassy field. The grass was probably thigh to waist high. And as I looked around, I saw someone approaching me. And when I first arrive in heaven, things are a little fuzzy, like almost like when you open your physical eyes first thing in the morning. And sometimes you got to do a little bit of that and rub your eye to get things going. It was kind of like that. So I look at someone approaching me, and then my eyes light up and I smile big because it's Jesus. And he looked so good. He looked like he was ready for a hair commercial. I don't know how to describe it. He just had, no part in his hair, and it was back and kind of flowing, mostly down to his shoulders, and he just looked so good. And he gave me a huge hug, just a huge, big hug, and I just soaked that in. And then Jesus told me that he had to show me something. So he takes my hand and starts walking me through the field, and I'm following him, holding his hand. And all of a sudden, Jesus takes a step up. Looks like it's in midair, but his foot holds, and he starts walking up what looks like an invisible set of stairs. Now I stop. I'd let my hand drop because I'm just staring at what on earth is he walking up. And I was sort of prepared for this because 10-ish years ago, God introduced me to the concept that there are other dimensions other than just the dimension that heaven sits on. And I was blessed to have most of my experiences on heaven's dimension, but there are more. And when I wanted to start to see those dimensions, it was really, really difficult. Jesus has told me he can see all the dimensions even at one time, but I still struggle to switch between them. And when Jesus stopped on the stairs, turned around and saw me struggling, staring at something I couldn't see, he said, "Dakota, I'll give you a heads up on what it is. It is a stone staircase, and it is on a different dimension. So just follow me." I said, okay. So I mimic Jesus' step. I take a step exactly onto where I had seen him step. And I begin to follow. The stairs were pretty steep. And sure enough, as I was probably about 7 steps in, my vision changed. Instead of seeing this field below, which took some faith to just trust that you're going to be fine midair, it changed from a grassy field below to stone steps and stone walls on either side of me and of Jesus. And I was right behind Jesus. And as I looked forward, I kind of had to peer around him a little bit. And there was a doorway on the other side and had this light blue, almost like a neon blue light shining through. And before we passed through it, Jesus stopped, looked at me, and said, "Are you ready?" And Jesus says this to me a lot, and I rarely know what we're going into, but I always say yes. When Jesus asks you if you're ready, well, hopefully you can say yes. I said yes, and Jesus stepped through this doorway, and it was a really big step, this last step, really big. And I follow him, also really big step for me, and we get to the other side, and yet again, it's a little bit hazy for me as I'm adjusting to, I think, what is on a different dimension. The first thing I noticed was this dirt street. It wasn't like a dirty dirt street. It was like packed dirt street. And then this wall of tents, like really nice fabric tents. And the vibe it sort of gave was the back alley of a Thai marketplace. And that was sort of that road and the tents was a little bit to the right. And on the left was where Jesus had walked. And he had stepped up onto this wooden platform. The platform was there. It had sort of differentiated between the street and this outdoor seating area for what kind of looks like a restaurant. Well, I followed Jesus and I stepped up onto the platform too. And Jesus stopped around this pool table. It looked like a pool table. It wasn't exactly a pool table. And above the pool table were these little like lights and a little bit of ivy. It was nice. It was beautiful. And Jesus had started playing a game, except it wasn't with a pool stick. He had grabbed the main ball and just shot it into the table of all the other balls. And he was really good at this game because several other balls went right into the pockets. Every time a ball rolled into the pocket, the light right above that pocket would light up with a little display. It was like really like, oh, that's fun. That's cool. And so Jesus has his turn and he looks at me across the table and I'm like, I want to play. He goes, sure. He makes a gesture like, go for it. So I take the one of the balls and then I go ahead and I fling it to roll it into the other ones, and it hits, but I don't get nearly the amount of success Jesus has. I think like one ended up in a pocket, and then that lit up over the light, and that was really cool. And then that was sort of it. I kind of lost a little bit of interest after that, even though that was fun. And I looked around and I said to Jesus, "This is not heaven." And he looks back at me. He goes, "No, this isn't." And I knew it because it was nice. It wasn't bad, but it didn't have the same glow. And Jesus then told me, this place is on a dimension, imagination dimension. And this is a place where people can create their best version of heaven without having to submit their ego and submit and recognize me. And Jesus said, Dakota, this place is someone's best idea of what heaven would be like, their absolute top idea of what heaven would be like. And I look around and I think to myself, you can imagine how this might be someone in the world's perspective on their best imagination of heaven. And it made me sad though, because it just wasn't it. There's just so much joy to experience in heaven. And I asked Jesus, how long do people stay here? And Jesus said, as long as they want to. But he told me that after people spend enough time in these, I started to call them pseudo heavens, but I think Jesus calls them paradises, or a paradise. And Jesus told me that after enough time, where it's just kind of an echo chamber of your best ideas, the best you can imagine, but nothing more, you still end up saying this is still unfulfilling. And they'll move on. This is a part 3 coming up.